Hi, and welcome to TomTalks. You've got Nona and Hope here, and today we are joined by two experts that are going to be discussing with us the healing effects of nature. We're really excited to get into this topic, so without further ado, I will allow our guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Catharine McCord, and I work at Denver Botanic Gardens in the therapeutic horticulture department. And I have a little bit of a background in horticultural therapy, herbal medicine, and landscape design. So I really like to look at outdoor spaces and the built environment in terms of what we can do to interact and engage with our environment and bring it into our daily lives.
Greetings, Catherine. Nice to meet you in this virtual space. My name is Dr. Itin. I'm a professor of social work at MSU Denver, and I've been here since 2012 and teaching in social work education for about the last 25 years. And before that, I was an outward bound instructor, so I taught in the wilderness in Colorado and also in California and a bit in Maine and New Hampshire as well. So in fact, I'll be teaching a course this spring on adventure and wilderness therapy in a social work context.
Nice. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here with us today.
All right, if you guys are ready, we're ready to jump into the questions. The first one that I have for you all is, why do you feel it's important for people to have access to outdoor spaces?
So having access to our outdoor spaces is really important to us as humans because we are a part of nature. I know a lot of times we think about nature as being something separate from us, but really we're part of this world and we're part of the environment. And I think in our modern society, we spend a lot of time indoors and we have this workload that we always feel like we need to get done, and our priorities are established by usually our work and what we have to do for a living to make a living. So having access to the outdoors or just taking a moment to get outside reminds us that we're part of something that's greater than us and that we're part of something that connects us to the entire world and to everyone that we share this planet with. It's important to connect with our natural environment as much as we spend our time in the built environment.
Those are great points, Catherine, because I think when I think of nature and spending time outside, I do think of spiritual center. I think that spirituality is a critical part. And for me, that is about this connection to something bigger. I don't think when you are in nature and truly out away from the modern conveniences, I certainly begin to feel how small I am in the context of the universe when you see all the stars. But I think ultimately it is about this recognition that we are a part of the earth, that the same chemicals that are in the planet, that are in the water, are in us. And we are part of that ecosystem. And I think we become detached from that in this world. And particularly in this virtual world that we're spending time in now, it seems very different than the physical world that we are as a species grounded in. So I think those are some of what, for me, are important elements of why nature is an important part of health.
I absolutely agree with everything you said. So when we're out in nature, it gives us this opportunity to disconnect from, like you said, the virtual world. So we've got little pocket computers. I think almost all of us carry them around with us all the time, and we're so accessible all of the time. So when we're in nature, we get to experience what it's like to be in the moment and in the present moment. And it provides these opportunities to single in on different senses.
It's really powerful what you both just contributed. I think that recognizing that health and living in the moment, it is such an important connection to nature and the time that we spend outdoors. So considering what you guys just said and kind of these varying degrees of wild and how people interact with the outdoors and stuff, how do those things have an impact on someone's physical being, their physical well-being, their mental health, and their mindfulness practices?
So there's a lot of research that is being developed now, really, that looks at what happens physically to our bodies. Our blood pressures go down, our heart rate goes down. There are changes even in brain pattern and sort of some of those pieces. And And so the research is getting much more sophisticated in being able to track the ways in which our body responds to nature, including, and I'll put in there, that animals being a part of that nature as well.
Absolutely. When you're out in nature, you get to observe what animals are doing. And something that really comes to mind for me is I'm watching a squirrel or I'm watching a wild animal or a bird, and they are not thinking about a conversation they had yesterday. They're not thinking about their deadlines later. They're really reacting to what their stimulus is, and they're collecting food, they're interacting with each other, and they're moving when they're uncomfortable. And I think for us, a lot of times we have to stay in situations where we are uncomfortable. So our bodies send us these signals that say, this is a threatening conversation, or this makes me feel uneasy and I don't want to be here. But our daily lives make it so that we need to kind of counter our natural feelings to stay in a situation that we have to stay in. So when we're out in nature, we kind of get to let that go, and we can observe and learn from the animals.
We all know about the restorative nature of nature. I mean, that being in nature restores us, kind of, I mean, to use the analogy of recharging the battery, refreshing the battery. And I think that it does have this capacity to add energy back into who we are and in that moment. And I think that it is useful to, again, link this back to the active forms of engagement, because for most of us, we engage fairly actively in nature. So we do things like hiking and biking and running and so forth. And in that way, that recreation is about recreation. It's about recreating who we are. And so it's not surprising that we recreate a lot in nature, that recreation happens in our connection and reconnection back to those central pieces. And to recognize that not everyone has that privilege or that capacity to get out deep into the wilderness, which is certainly, you know, a sacred place. In most places here, even in the Front Range, have lots of open space. And even if it's just the local park, there is still natural space there as well.
Mm. So Catherine, earlier you had mentioned kind of that we as humans don't always have the luxury to get out of situations that make us feel uncomfortable, and that sometimes you do have to lean into the discomfort of something. I think this year a lot of people have had to kind of wrestle with that, as leaning into something that's uncomfortable. And I'm wondering if you both can explain more about kind of this mentality around leaning into the discomfort and ways to cope with being outside of one's comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know a lot of us have stressful lives. Like we all experience stress, and we can't avoid that. And with being in a pandemic, we're having this other layer of stress, and we're having difficult conversations. I know right now with Denver, we're experiencing new restrictions on gathering size. So it leads to a lot of difficult conversations on, you know, what I'm comfortable with, what our county is saying we should be doing, things like that. So when we experience these difficult situations, it's nice to have some kind of tool or coping mechanism to help us manage our stress and be able to communicate really respectfully with those that we're having these conversations with.
For me, the idea of the comfort zone is a really important metaphor for life. And within my work in Outward Bound, and even as a teacher today, I mean, there is this necessity that in order to learn, you need to be somewhat uncomfortable. You have to be towards the edge of your comfort zone. If you jump too far out, well, it's panic and so forth. You can't really learn very well out there. As we get less and less healthy, our comfort zones tend to decrease, and we have less and less options and choices. And so one of the challenges is to expand our comfort zone. I think part of the discomfort of the pandemic is that we are being artificially boxed in, and our choices and options to stimulate ourselves externally are being cut off. And so that's a reality. I do think that oftentimes the most scary place in the comfort zone is when we go inside and our own exploration of ourselves, which, as we've talked about, in the natural world, I think tends to come more easily in some ways. That can be another way of forcing us to expand our comfort zone by not having those distractions. So I think that's an opportunity in this time where we are required, really, if we're smart, to be physically distant from our friends and family and so forth. So, but there is a huge universe inside you that you can spend all the time. You know, there is nature all around you. You just have to open your eyes and pay attention to it.
That's great. Thank you so much for those points. Going back to that access piece that you touched on earlier, and a little bit in this last question, there are a ton of people who don't have access and the privilege to get outdoors and to get into varying degrees of nature. We might only have access to public parks and that kind of thing. Do you have any suggestions, resources, ideas for those who don't have that type of access but still want to explore new outdoor spaces and how to connect with those?
Well, I think, you know, for we in Denver and in Colorado in general, but it's really in the Front Range, are blessed with lots of open space, that many of which is accessible by public transportation. And so to at least get closer to nature, to see a little stream. I mean, you know, through the middle of Denver, you know, we have a wonderful waterway that has all of the wonderful pieces, and there are even more wild places within that context that are sort of the natural floodplain. But even in a local garden or planting a micro garden in your own context, I mean, it becomes an opportunity to sort of get a little closer. I don't think there's one way. I think that it is about inviting what is possible for you. You can bring the natural world into that environment.
It's a lot about building a relationship with the environment, recognizing that you are part of the environment. You don't have to go far. You don't have to spend a long time outdoors, and you don't have to spend a lot of time with your plants. So if you were to go to like the Cherry Creek Trail, you don't have to walk the whole length of it because you've got that water, and that's going to bring in this whole ecological system. If you just make it there and spend time right where you are, you can spend, you know, a lot of research says 10 minutes, but if you've only got 5 minutes, it's worth it because you're there, you're breathing the fresh air, you are observing something that you wouldn't see in your own home. And if you can't get outside, you can't make it there, there's a lot of plant swapping communities. There's a lot of ways to get house plants, or if you have friends that have cuttings of plants, a lot of people that have house plants need to divide them and need to start cuttings because they outgrow their containers. So you could talk to people about maybe sharing or swapping plants.
I love that. And I love that you both pointed out that just being connected to another source of life brings so much life to you. I love that.
Anyone who is wanting to find that favorite space in Denver and in Colorado broadly, I think can find it. It's just taking that risk to explore it.
Thank you guys both so much for being a part of this video, for having this conversation. This was really insightful. I was trying to stop myself from being like, yeah, at like several times throughout the video. So thank you so much. Thank you. It was really, really lovely. And this has been Tom Talks.